Hello and good morning, everyone. Oh, sorry, we have a little feedback here. My name is Jillian Bender-Cormier. I'm brand manager with Bender Insurance Solutions, and we want to welcome you to another educational BenderU webinar discussing innovation in hiring and retaining talent. Some housekeeping notes. If you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to type them into the chat box or in the Q&A section. We'd like this to be an interactive experience, so our presenters will be available to answer your questions in real time throughout the webinar. During our additional Q&A time at the end of the presentation, I will be sharing other questions you might have with our speakers. We want to be conscious of time, so if we don't get to answer all of your questions, we will gladly reach out to you individually after the webinar. You are all in listen-only mode and will remain muted throughout the webinar. This session is being recorded. At the conclusion of the webinar, the recording link as well as a copy of the slide deck will be forwarded to you. We have an incredible set of experts sharing with us this morning, but I'll let our own technology risk advisor, Brian Murray, have the honor of introducing our first presenter. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you very much, Jillian. I'm Brian Murray. I'm the technology risk advisor here at Bender Insurance Solutions. And Jillian, I think it's not at the intro slide, just FYI, unless I'm seeing the wrong thing on the screen. But yeah, I want to introduce our two awesome speakers. So Austin Robb is from Humanly, and I'll get to him in a second. Abigail Kidd is from Spark. So they're going to tell us all about their amazing companies and what they're doing. These are two local, really dynamic, exciting tech companies that you're going to hear a lot from in the next few years. So Abigail Kidd, she's the VP of Client Experience at Spark. She earned her bachelor's degree from UC Davis, her MBA from William Jessup University. She has over 10 years experience in training, content development, HR, and process improvement. She's a prolific reader, prolific writer, an amazing writer, and I highly recommend checking out the Spark blog. So she posts really valuable guidance on employee engagement, management success, and employee burnout. So definitely check that out. And from Humanly, we have Austin Robb. He was employee number 1 at Humanly. He now leads the sales and partnership teams. Sac State grad, Austin has over a decade of experience in the solar, the lending, and SaaS spaces. Full disclosure, Austin and I used to work together at SkySlope before Humanly. I had the pleasure of working with him. SkySlope's a Sacramento-based real estate software company. So we learned a lot about real estate while we were together, but most importantly, we argued a lot about NBA draft prospects and which was the best Star Wars movie. Obviously, I was mostly right. So Austin, take it away, and it is all you. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, Austin, if you're talking, we can't hear you right now.
Thank you. Yeah, I was stuck on mute and it would not let me off. But thank you for the awesome introduction there, Brian. And I've come to learn you are right both about the Star Wars argument. Although I do think there's still value in 1 through 3. 4, 5, and 6 are definitely the leaders in that charge. But more about Humanly and conversational intelligence today. That's what I'm here to talk about. What do we do at Humanly? Our focus is really, of course, hire and retain at scale through equitable and efficient candidate-employee conversations. But what does that mean to us? Our focus is on screening and scheduling at scale. We really want to focus on candidate interactions. How can we provide the most value to candidates and get them connected to people? And that's a big focus for us, getting people connected to people. There's a lot of fear in the AI, in the automation recruiting space about removing people's jobs and the overarching fear of iRobot and eliminating people's jobs. But our goal is really to connect people to people and using automation to do that. How can we be efficient in that matter? So what's the problem that we're trying to solve? early on when we were sitting down and trying to really develop and hash out what Humanly could do, we realized there was a big problem in the hiring space, and it's just time wasted. There's over 60 hours per open role of back and forth, emailing, screening, what time are you available? What time zone are you in? Note taking, all of these little things that recruiters are doing that, to be frank, is kind of a waste of their time. They're these really passionate professionals that are so invested in getting people into the right position in the right organization, but they're spending most of their day just doing admin work and just, basically being coordinators. And, with all that, there's this negative experience that comes because, there's so much time lost, and candidates are on the other end of that experience. They're waiting, and they're waiting to hear back. Am I qualified? Am I going to hear back from this recruiter? What day is my interview going to be? And interviewing, recruiting is a job in itself. They're applying to multiple positions. It's stressful. And, what can we do to remove some of that pain? And that's where we really started to focus in on the solution, which was, trying to solve that negative experience and remove that, because people, they post the negative experiences. Nobody goes to Glassdoor with their positive experiences unless their employer asks them to, or unless they're using an awesome, software like Spark to give that type of feedback. But in reality, most of the time people go when to Glassdoor when they're upset. So we wanted to figure out, how do we solve that problem? The way that we've approached that on the next slide would be to really focus on screening and scheduling at scale. So let's give recruiters time back in their day so they can focus on the important stuff, right? They shouldn't have to be handling those little silly emails back and forth. So we've done that by creating these really structured conversations. We're not using natural language processing. We don't want to let the candidate ask, what's the weather in New York? That's irrelevant, right? We want to get candidates from point A to point B. Let's make sure that we can create these efficiencies so we can get candidates, really providing candidates outcomes. We want to eliminate that kind of black hole of waiting of will I be qualified, and provide them a result. Maybe that's getting scheduled for the next steps. Maybe that's just letting them know that, hey, today's not the right day, but it could be tomorrow. We have other positions available for them. So really providing them outcomes is the focus. Now, where do we do that, right? Really, the answer is everywhere. And that's a big part of our technology. In the past, you'd expect a candidate to go to your website, click into your career page and fill out an application, submit a resume, a cover letter. But that process is just a bit antiquated at this point. We need to live in all of the channels that candidates already exist. So we take this multi-channel approach. We plug into your website. That could be on your career page as a website widget. We want to be in text message, text available, 95% success rate with text response, increasing efficiency there. We want to make sure that we're getting to candidates' mobile phones, social media, email, wherever a candidate is already going to find you. That's where we want Humanly to be, to plug in and to create those efficiencies. And the big part is to connect you back to people. So that could be the recruiter, that could be the hiring manager, who's running the interview. We want to make sure that we're plugged into your process, that we're layered into all of these different channels, and we're collecting these candidates wherever they are, whatever time of day that might be. 2 in the morning, maybe they just got off a shift at a waiting position, and that's when they have a chance to start looking at what their next position might be. We need to be available at that time while our recruiting team's taking a nap, right? So we can get these candidates connected back to them so they can get interviewed quicker, right? Get back on our calendar. Actually, this is a great chance for you to kind of try it out for yourself. So if you do have your phones with you, I know normally we don't take our phones out in class, but pull your phones out and you can try out this QR code right here on the screen. It gives you the chance to have that mobile experience on your right in your hands. Also, if you're interested, you can apply for a job at Burger King. Just kidding, it's a demo, so don't worry. You go through the full experience and schedule. We've had a ton of success in the restaurant world. Creating these efficiencies with Burger King, Taco Bell, Jack in the Box, Wingstop. Not just food though, right? I might just be a little bit hungry right now. It's almost lunchtime. But we can also create these efficiencies with university hiring events. We've done a great job handling all of Moss Adams university hiring, career fairs, using QR codes to open up these avenues. At a career fair in the past, your collecting business cards, you're trying to talk to anybody who comes by your booth, but that's not always effective. So if we can give another avenue, right, a simple QR code for a candidate who's walking by to just point and shoot, learn if they're qualified, get scheduled onto your calendar, then we can remove that friction and we can get those candidates into your system as quick as possible. And that's where we're really starting to see some of the successes that we've had, which I'll talk about on the next slide. Some of the success that we've seen, Fazoli's, for example, is a large Midwest Italian fast food restaurant. We were able to get them to 11% same-day hiring for their hourly team members. That doesn't seem like a huge number, but when you're talking to thousands of people every day, if we can get 11% of those people hired the same day before they're lost, that's a huge win for their GMs, because GMs are tasked with so many other things, right? They're in the back of the restaurant trying to make sure that everything's running smoothly, the kitchen operating well, and they're not thinking about jumping on the old Dell in the back office and going through recruiting emails and seeing who's available. So if we can remove that for them, give them time back in their day to focus on the business, we can start to increase those efficiencies for them. We're also focused on increasing show rate, right? We work so hard to get candidates interested in our brand and interested and excited, but then what happens if they just don't show up? We were able to see an increase in 2x show rate with Fazoli's as well, and then decreasing time to hire. And that's a big one in today's market. It's a candidate's market. Candidates apply to 10, 15, 20 jobs, right? With Indeed, with LinkedIn, and one-click apply. It's almost too easy. So if we can reduce that time to hire before they've got their interest somewhere else, that's a huge win for us. But we've talked about efficiencies, right? I'm talking about how do we create these efficiencies and get people to people? Well, that's what's next in the step in the process for us. It's the interview itself. How can we now create a more consistent interview process? We aim to remove unconscious bias is a big part of it for us, but also just little things like tracking talk listen ratio. Looking at words per minute. Candidates where English is a second language, you need to stay between 120 and 150 words per minute. So, and removing unconscious bias through tracking candidate sentiment, right? What topics are important to candidates when they come up? What's getting candidates excited about the interview process? But we're not just, measuring those little things. We're also starting to find some really interesting happenings on these interviews. Like one of our clients that you'll see on the next slide found that junior female entry-level candidates were getting 12 minutes less talk time per interview than their male counterparts, which when you hear is, it's eye-opening. It's something that you need to change that, but how do you really uncover those types of things, right? Like how can you really make those changes? And that's what we're trying to do, is unlock the interview. So what can we do to measure, right? Because on the next slide, you'll see that you can't change what you can't measure. So if we can provide you with actionable insights, so we can create behavior changes, that's how we really start to make these deep organizational changes. And a big part about that for us is we're not making assessments about candidates. We're not judging anybody. We're turning that back around and we're looking at ourselves. How can we be better? Like, how do we provide the best interview experience for our candidates? And how can we make sure that they're having that same consistent process? So the candidate in Florida is having the same experience as the candidate in California. It's all about creating consistencies and efficiencies. We've had a ton of success with this, not just with recruiters. We've also seen some really cool feedback from using this process for stay interviews, for exit interviews. How can we start to learn, use this same technology to learn what's important to candidates, which I know is something that'll resonate really well with Spark and their approach to, making sure that we have happy candidate or happy employees, excuse me. And then, we've had a bunch of, on the next slide, you'll see some of the clients that we're working with, of course. And also a big part of this for us, I've been talking about candidate experience. Well, how's your experience with our technology too? So we're looking at, we're giving candidates the chance to rate their experience with us every time that they have an interaction. Through a couple 100,000 interactions that we've had over the last couple years, we've been able to maintain a pretty steady rating of 4.7 out of 5. We also collect anecdotal feedback as well. And this gives us the ability to make changes to our system. We're constantly learning and growing, and we're tweaking to make sure that we can provide the best experience for your company, for your brand, right? To make sure that you're having the best brand forward experience as well. And of course, if you'd like to talk to me, you can use that nifty little QR code in the corner there, and you can always find time with me. I believe we might have some time for some questions.
We do have time for questions. Feel free again to use the Q&A section to ask those. If we don't have any pop up, no worries. We will definitely have a dedicated Q&A time at the end as well if you have questions for Austin. And I'm not seeing any come through, so we can go ahead and carry it over to Abigail if you're ready to kick it off. And one moment. There we go. All right, Abigail, can you now? Welcome now.
Oh, I know, welcome. So this is why we love presenting with Humanly. I mean, they really help organizations find the right people, and well, Spark, we help keep them. So for the next slide is who is Spark? We help companies motivate and retain great employees with AI-driven personalized recognition. Employees really want to work that recognize their employees. It's one of the top 10 traits they'll look for. So now that as a company, you've got your great employees with Humanly, it's important to fix the hole in your bucket. So I'm sure you've heard of the Great Resignation by now. The next slide. But what's important to note is that the pandemic just accelerated existing trends like employee dissatisfaction and turnover. Over the years, even before COVID, we've seen decreasing employee loyalty, and it's now at an all-time low. But employers can't fix what they don't understand, especially those managers who have hybrid or remote employees, out of sight, out of mind. It's time to shift perception and behaviors, as this great reshuffle is expected to continue for several more years. So next slide. It's important to understand why employees are leaving. For example, when employers were asked why their people had quit, they cited compensation, work-life balance, poor physical or mental health. And these issues were important and they did matter, but not as much as employers thought they did. So in this first red bubble here, on average, only 12% of employees choose to leave for more money. And for the next bubble, over half employees are ready to quit. And then the orange bubble is, this is extremely expensive. Turnover costs can be between 90 to 200% of an employee's salary. So on the next slide, we're going to put this into perspective a bit of how expensive turnover really is alone. In the orange bubble in the middle, if you're looking at losing an entry-level employee based on average US salary in 2022, you're looking at losing about $80,000 on the low end. And that only accelerates as you look at higher technical positions. So on the right, that's over $300,000. These examples are based on only one employee quitting, and 65% of resignations are voluntary. So investing in retention is critical as you're navigating this post-pandemic workplace. So next slide. Having effective recognition in place is going to help drive retention in organizations. 47 million Americans already left their jobs since April 2021, and a recent McKinsey study found that the #1 reason employees are leaving is that they don't feel valued by their organization or managers. And that should be popping up in a little bubble on the right. There it is. And so then we're going to go ahead and move into the next slide. Is now that we understand how recognition and appreciation can help drive retention, I'm going to go through a quick 3-step employee retention strategy to help you in the post-pandemic workplace. So step number 1, you can't manage what you can't measure, much like what Austin shared with their solution. So first, to recommend getting a benchmark and uncovering how valued and appreciated your employees feel with a confidential survey that asks the questions. The survey can help uncover key employee insights to increase business outcomes and retention. For example, Spark found that 75% of employees don't feel valued and appreciated, yet rank this as extremely important to their workplace experience. There's a big gap there. And so then this leads us to step number 2, is how do employees feel valued and appreciated? So once you know what's important, it's time to understand preferences, but it's really difficult for managers and leaders to know where to start. There's a lot of research and confusion out there around the employee appreciation. So for the first box up at the top, less than half of employees want to be shown appreciation appreciation through words. In the next box, only 6% of employees desire appreciation through gifts. Red box, if you click, please. And then the blue box next, 40% of professionals prefer recognition for success. And then the final gray box at the bottom is 75% of people are satisfied with a thank you instead of a gift or a celebration. So as you can see, it's clear that there's no one size fits all. And that's why Spark focuses on personalizing the approach when it comes to recognition and appreciation. So on the next slide is how do you feel appreciated? So another way that we're helping is we have a free appreciation style quiz to uncover how you feel appreciated. So you've already had practice with the QR code. So if you have a phone, go ahead and scan the code, take the quiz. I'd love to share in the chat. I'll also drop the link if you just want to do this on the computer as well. And it's really interesting to see, and on the next slide shortly, we'll see the different styles. But this is really to help understand that, you know, there is no one size fits all approach and everybody feels appreciated differently. So in the meantime, any questions before we move on to the next slide?
No questions have come through yet, so.
Perfect. All right. So, and the next slide, these are the total 6 styles. So some people you may notice when you take the quiz that you may have multiple styles. On our team, we have, I think, every single one of these that have come up with our teammates. I personally am a connect with me. My fiance is a tell me. My CEO is a tell me. So we also have a celebrate me and trust me. So these are all very different, and they're very interesting to see how somebody might feel appreciated in a way that's different than their manager may think that they feel appreciated. So on the very left-hand side, tell me is similar to words of appreciation. Show me would be through a gift, tangible gift that's personalized. Celebrate me, they want to be, high fives in the break room or the Zoom icons. Support me as if somebody shows them that they appreciate them by offering to help them out with a project. Connect with me is like quality time. So, all of these on the slide here, I'm curious to see what everybody's are if you want to share. If not, this is just something you can take back with you and your team to see how you can personalize your appreciation styles. So then the next slide is, there you go, personalized appreciation. So $46 billion, that jumped to $97 billion a year that US employers spend on rewards to motivate their employees. Yet 79% of employees still don't feel appreciated. And why? And it really comes to employee appreciation recognition. There's a significant disconnect between what employers think is important to employees and then what is actually important to employees. And we see that's a lot when, and a manager may be a tell me, but their employee may be a celebrate me or vice versa. And that really impacts how they feel appreciated. So on the next slide, this is an interesting little exercise that's real fast. So when you take a look, and I'm curious to see if you want to share what you see first. Some people may see a face first, some people may see the bird first, some people only see one, some people see both. And this is an example of how the biggest opportunity is manager perception and how they see employees. Our belief at Spark is that when you change perception, you can change behavior. So on the next slide, every employee is motivated differently, but the problem is that managers aren't equipped. There's an art to recognition that makes it effective. And to personalize every experience, it needs to happen at the right, in the right way, the right time, with the right reward. And in fact, the experience of the recognition is just as important as the reward itself. So here's an example. Our CEO had met with the VP of sales at a Fortune 100 company out of Silicon Valley. And one of their top sales people just received a $200,000 bonus at the end of the year, but was forgotten by the CEO on the year-end presentation. And that person ended up leaving and went to work for a competitor. So that shows that for this individual, the bonus was not as important as being celebrated at the end of the year presentation. And there was a big missed opportunity there. So on the next slide, every employee is unique, and it really goes beyond the perks. Our Spark research found that the top 3 most important things to employees in the workplace are that their manager treats them with respect, They care about the results their organization achieves and that they have an approachable manager. It's not pay, it's not benefits, it's all around human connection. And top performers are always going to be compensated well. It's about how valued and appreciated they feel in the workplace and the relationships that are being built. To ensure that your resources are allocated in the right way, your managers need to be equipped to personalize their appreciation so employees feel valued. And this will really help transform the employee experience and help you retain your employees. So on the next slide, just to wrap things up, here are a few resources that we have. At the very top link is an ROI analysis. This will help you identify and uncover how employee engagement and recognition is impacting your bottom line. The next one is a free Be Heard survey. So for the first step is to get a benchmark. We do offer a free survey to identify those key areas that are important to your employees. And then the last two QR codes, if you would like to connect with our CEO, Anna Strauss, or myself on LinkedIn, those are available. And then that just about wraps it up.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Abigail. And thank you, Austin. This is the time for a Q&A, and we are open again in the question section for you to go ahead and send your questions for either Austin or Abigail or both. All right, we have one, I think for you, Austin. Can humanly voice be adapted for in-person interviews?
Oh, great question. So that's something that we're working on right now. Full disclosure, Humanly Voice is a new product for us. We're developing it every day. Chat is really our bread and butter that we've been working on for the last 3 years, but voice is definitely the direction we're headed. So to answer the question, right now we're just developing it so we can get to phone calls using things like dial pad and those types of phone systems rather than just video chats. Next step for us will be to work on an in-person experience. The only requirement, of course, will be using some sort of recording device in the meeting in order for us to feed that information back into our system. So short answer is no, not currently.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. We have an additional question for you, Austin. Have you started working in healthcare yet, and how would it apply?
Yeah, healthcare has been is definitely something that we've been focused on early on. It's there's so many roles and positions available. We really focus our chat solutions on those high volume positions. So yeah, healthcare is definitely an industry that we're really interested in continuing to be involved with. In terms of some specific examples that would work well, an organization like Kaiser that's hiring hundreds of thousands of people throughout the year, or not hundreds, excuse me, thousands of people throughout the year. Well, that takes hundreds of thousands of conversations. So if we can create those efficiencies to connect those candidates directly to the hiring managers as efficiently as possible, then that's a huge win on both ends.
Wonderful, thank you. Abigail, I have a question for you. How do you drive manager engagement with your recognition platform when you implement the solution?
Yes, thanks for asking. It's a great question. So the software is, it's really big about equipping managers, right? Changing those perceptions and behaviors. So with during the onboarding process, all employees, everybody who signs up goes through an assessment, and they fill out their preferences, and they fill out, how they like to be appreciated for a work anniversary, is it public or private? So all these preferences and their favorite items, their favorite drinks, their favorite restaurants or where they like to eat, things like that are all in their profile. So then managers will get real-time alerts and reminders of, oh, it's Austin's work anniversary coming up, and he really likes, tacos. So, that way the manager would be equipped to know that, okay, let's take Austin out for tacos for his work anniversary. That way they're getting real-time alerts and helping to make the recognition a habit for the managers.
That's great, thank you. A question that we have is, what can we do with 1099 contractors for attracting and retaining 1099 contractors?
Was that for me?
I think it might be for either of you, for that segment of 1099 folks. How do you attract and retain them?
Sure, Austin, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, so I mean, 1099 contractors is an interesting conversation, and it really does fit in well to our approach with chat in terms of, you know, opening up the funnel and making sure that we can give them the information that they need, but also make sure that we can collect the qualifications that we need to know before connecting them to our team. You know, it's a high volume world. There's tons of different, you know, positions available in that world. So if we can open up that door and we can make sure that we're qualifying, collecting those baseline experiences early on, you know, maybe they need a license, you know, appropriate transportation, licensures, and if we can check all those boxes before connecting them to your team, then we know that we can make sure that we can reduce that time to hire and get them, you know, working for your organization as quickly as possible.
Abigail, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, sure. So 1099 employees, you know, they're employees. They don't have to be a W-2 employee to be included as an employee in the Spark system. So you can also add, you know, interns, you know, to be included as well. So even if they are a 1099, they can still be included as part of the organization for recognition programs.
Wonderful. Thank you. A question for you, Austin. Some employers, like Disney, have to reject many candidates. How can the conversational experience leave someone as a fan even if they don't get the job?
Yeah, that's a really interesting conversation, you know, and it kind of ties back to something that Abigail and I were talking about earlier about employer branding and just the importance of making sure that, you know, you're providing the best candidate experience regardless of what the outcome is going to be. You know, early on, we actually had a conversation, Preem, our CEO, with the CFO of Disney early on, where we found that Disney employees were actually spending 10 times more at the park than a standard park goer, which is incredible to hear, mainly because of how expensive things can be at Disney in the first place, but also because, you know, you've got the people that are applying for your jobs are oftentimes going to be the ones that are most interested in your product, you know. So how do we need to make sure that we're treating those people that have shown interest. They've raised their hand and they said, I want to work for you. They're obviously you know, a brand ambassador in a way of you. They care about what you're doing. So we need to make sure that we're providing them with the best experience regardless of the outcome. So that could be letting them down easily and letting them down gently and letting them know, hey, we don't have a position today, but you know, we really do value you, and we might have positions in the future for you. So creating a good experience, because that candidate today could be a client tomorrow.
Wonderful. Thank you, Austin. A question here, and this is for you, Abigail. How do you create a recognition or appreciation program that is inclusive when you have a diverse workforce from different generations and backgrounds?
That's a great question. So we always recommend when building out a recognition solution is to start with some core basic programs, such as, you know, work anniversaries and birthdays and core values. So core values are a really great way to really celebrating those is to attract and build the right brand, attracting the right candidates and people. So we like to start with those basic, and those spread across, you know, any generation, you know, celebrating work anniversaries and birthdays. And as long as they're specific to how each individual prefers to be recognized is more important than any generation. And that's what we found. Everyone's just unique, you know, it doesn't really matter where you come from, your background, your age, as long as it means something to you. So with that though, Austin and I did have a conversation earlier about, you know, building a brand, and that was something that we did talk about, what are the core values, and that's a really great way.
Great, thanks, Abigail. I have another question for you, actually. Is there an ideal size of company that would benefit from Spark?
So we have several solutions. So one is the survey, and then the other one is the full recognition platform. So an ideal size, you know, we have clients that are as small as, you know, 7 to 10 employees. And even with that size, it works really well. It just can take a lot of the stress of, finding going out and picking up all of the rewards and the gift cards and managing and tracking preferences on a spreadsheet, So even as a company that small, it's perfectly fine. So ideal size, not necessarily. I think that any size company could really benefit from it.
Thank you. I have a question for Austin. How are clients using the data from your voice tool to measure their progress with their DEI objectives?
Yeah, good question. And that really, it ties back to just DEI initiatives in general. We are spending, some companies are spending tens of thousands of dollars into DEI training and, having on-site trainings for their employees. But what happens after that? Like what happens in the next steps? And that's really what we're trying to focus on with Voice is providing consistent, measurable data that they can continue to use, and they can continue to make these internal adjustments. And really, a big part of that for us is that we're providing aggregate data back to your company from the whole, right? Not just an individual phone call, because a phone call could go left or right. There could have been something, maybe the recruiter or the hiring manager was having a bad day. But if we can provide you that consistent or that large aggregate data set back, and we can give you that, from that 30,000 foot view, what's happening on these conversations and how can we make changes on it, that's when we can really start to make like the deep organizational changes. So how are our clients using that? As simply as identifying maybe per department, what's important in one department compared to another. One of our clients in New York found early on, they were having a lot of trouble hiring engineers. And they had this talk track worked up that they thought was really powerful, and they had workshopped. But what they realized after using Voice during one of our trial periods was that the thing that was resonating with engineers was remote work and work-life balance. Being able to decide like when could they work and where were they able to work, right? As long as I get my job done and as long as I'm providing results to you, like that should be what's important. At least that's what they were finding on these calls. So after they found that, they were able to make a shift, and they were able to change their scripts, essentially, their script adherence, to make sure that they were bringing up the topics that resonated most with those engineers. On the other side, we had a client in Washington that was they were trying to discover what was important to their candidates on their conversations, and they thought that initially maybe it was just the social initiatives of the CEO, right? Like what was he doing outside of the office that was important? But when they tied it back in and they really looked into the data, there was a lot more going on in the conversations that was resonating with their clients or their candidates that was more important than just those outside factors. So we can start to really tune the conversation and create a consistent interview process to get the results that we're needing, but also to remove some of those, unconscious bias, those unconscious happenings that are happening below the surface.
Thanks, Austin. A question for you, Abigail. What should we do differently for a remote first company?
Oh, yes. So COVID had sent everybody to hybrid or remote. So this is where, having a technology like Spark is really useful to help managers, employees stay connected. And so with the platform, for example, there are team insights. So they can identify maybe those employees who have not been recognized in a while, maybe those quieter employees who are falling below the radar. So that's a way to be able to keep track, because they're, as Austin shared, sometimes there is some unconscious bias, or maybe you're, communicating more with some employees, even remotely, that are working on a project or just are a little bit more vocal. Right, so it's easy to lose track, and of the quieter employees or those who may not like to be celebrated. So, especially for remote or in the office, it's just kind of using a software like Spark is really helpful to keep track of them.
Thanks, Abigail. All right, well, we have another question, and I think it's for both of you. What future trends in hiring and retention should we be aware of?
You want to go first, Austin?
Yeah, I guess it's really industry dependent. One of the things that we're seeing, especially with our restaurant clients, is reducing time to hire. There's There's a balance though that needs to be had in that process of removing friction, because we've all seen with some of the approaches with Indeed, for example, with one-click apply, that it almost can remove too much friction. So we need to find that balance of collecting the information we need, but creating the efficiencies that we can to make sure that candidates are having the best experience possible, but also that we can really reduce that time to hire down, because these days it's all about speed. Candidates apply to 10 jobs at night, and sometimes they can't even remember which job they applied to. So we need to create a memorable and a brand forward experience, and that's really big for us too, is making sure that we really focus on the brand experience. You don't want to be forgotten about in the masses of people, right? So we use images, we're using fun content, building GIFs and pictures into the conversational experiences to make something that's memorable, really so it's something that lasts and resonates with the candidates, but also is reducing that time to hire and creating those efficiencies.
Yeah, 100% agree with that brand. I mean, employees are really looking for, connecting with the company that they're working for. Something we've seen work really well for our clients is really celebrating and highlighting their strengths that are identified by what's most important to their employees, and putting those on their website, on their job postings, on their career pages, sharing, stories from what their employees are saying about the company, and really getting that out there to make sure that employees, as they're going and selecting which company they want to work for, that they are really feeling connected.
Yeah, I really like that, Abigail, sharing too, making sure that you're, there's so much access to information these days. So making sure that you've got, that you're sharing what your success is, right? Sharing your wins, sharing the things that people are excited about. If I know that my CEO is going to be sending me tacos once a month, like that's something that I want to know about before I interview. That gets me excited. You've got a champion in me for that, right? So sharing the little things, because that's what people are going to remember and what people are going to get excited about.
Yeah, and in fact, just a little tidbit is 72% of job seekers say it's important to see details about the company culture in their job descriptions. And we've seen so many, not all of them do, and it's really important for them to see that.
Wonderful. Well, I think that is a perfect last question to wrap up our Q&A. And thank you again, Austin, Abigail, for sharing with us today. Wonderful, very timely information. And we appreciate all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for today's BenderU. As a reminder, this session has been recorded, and a link to view and share the recording will be emailed to you following the webinar, along with a copy of today's slide deck. Should you have any questions that arise, we know that tends to happen after the webinar, that these questions might pop into your head. Please feel free to still reach out to us, and we'll be happy to help. Thank you again, and we hope you have a wonderful day. And thank you again, Austin and Abigail.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, Jillian. Thanks, Brian.